Hello, and welcome to another California ISO Energy Matters conversation. My name is Gary Delsohn. I work in communications at the California ISO, and today we have three experts from our grid operations team to discuss the ISO's Control Center, Foundational Improvement and Modernization Program. I know that's a mouthful, but the work is as important and crucial to our continued success as the project title is long. With us today are John Phipps, the ISO's Executive Director of Grid Operations, and two of John's colleagues, Tricia Johnston, Director of Operational Readiness, and Brian Murray, Interim Director of Real-Time Operations. Welcome, everyone. To get started, why don't we start with each of you briefly describing how long you've been at the ISO, your role, and what you do here, and maybe we'll start with John, and then we can go to Tricia and Brian. So John, take it away.
Thank you, Gary. Welcome. I'm John Phipps, Executive Director of Grid Operations here at the California ISO. I have the California Balancing Authority Operations Team, the WEC Reliability Coordination Team, RC West, and then the Operational Readiness Team that's headed by Tricia. I've been at the ISO 24 years. I've worked most of the jobs in the control room and several positions in the company.
I'm Tricia Johnston, and I've been with California ISO for 16 years. Most of that has been working for operations in various support capacities. The Operational Readiness Department is responsible for a lot of the change management activities that flow through to the control room. So including network model changes, new resource implementation, new transmission projects, new policy software changes, operator training, procedure updates, as well as operations compliance and performance monitoring.
Right. And I'm Brian Murray, Director of Real-Time Operations. Primary role is making sure our BA operations and our WEIM market operations are following standards, following our tariff, and that's obviously 24/7, 365 responsibility for all the operators in each of those categories. Been at the ISO for about 24 years, similar to John, 17 years in operations.
So we have a little bit of experience on the panel today. You can get it all out, right? Thank you. So this is a big project, and I know you spent a lot of time preparing for it. Now you're in the middle of it, this Control Center modernization. John, can you give us a brief overview of some of the highlights of why it's so important?
Sure, Gary. Yeah, the power grid across the U.S., but I'd say in particular in California, is currently undergoing a transformation and evolution like we've never seen before. We're seeing dramatic changes in the types of resources that supply electricity and store electricity, and as well as how it's being consumed by businesses and residents. Because of that, the power grid is acting and responding differently. It's almost like a living organism that is now behaving much differently. The tools we've had so far have been built on the old system, and so we needed to kind of take a look at our basic foundational tools, processes, procedures, and evaluate how those were going to work as the grid evolved, and make sure that our operators have the tools and visibility they need to have awareness of the grid, but also anticipate potential problems. So that's what prompted, we use the acronym CCFINM, so Control Center, Foundational Improvement and Modernization, to evaluate our processes, our tools, determine what enhancements are needed to be made, and then have kind of a long-term roadmap of where we need to continue to evolve in the coming years.
Well, I was going to ask Tricia, what prompted this initiative, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, John. But were there other issues besides just the rapidly changing nature of the grid? Were there some things that we just needed to change ourselves internally?
Yeah, absolutely. So we took a really comprehensive look, not just at the applications that the operators are using, but we also started looking a lot of the supporting processes and operator training as well. So we have 4 tracks we're running that are people, process, technology, and training. And as John had mentioned, like that, the rate of change has been so rapid. Just as an example, like we found that a lot of the operator training over the years had evolved into a lot of change training. Which, was just layered change on change on change. And you have to take the time to go back and make sure that all of those changes are actually incorporated back into your foundational training. And so that way people get a more comprehensive understanding of how all of those things work together. So what we were seeing in the control room in terms of new tools and new technologies and a lot of things layered in, we saw evidence of that also in a lot of these upstream processes where we've had to go back and improve that foundation, and then also ensure that in the future, we're a lot more flexible and focused on quality and building those things into the foundation as we go. So new change comes in, you introduce the change, but you also add it to the foundation. So that way it's just more flexible and resilient over time.
And thank you for that. And obviously our first priority at the ISO, we're all about reliability, right? We need to keep the system running efficiently and managing it correctly and so forth. So Brian, can you talk about specifically, how this is going to affect our ability to maintain reliability and strengthen reliability?
Yeah, I think this CCF&M effort is really focused on our tools, our people, our processes. With the modernization aspect, where we see this going as the grid footprint is expanding, the number of resources that we're integrating, the amount of data that is coming in front of our operators it's getting to a point where we can't simply monitor everything. So there's going to be a paradigm shift where we have to concentrate our tools to display and alert operators when there are actions that need to be taken. So for example, if we have a forced transmission outage and there's switching occurring in real time associated with that planned outage, maybe those are types of things that don't need to be a high priority type of alarm or information that the operators need to readily see. So we've got to shift our focus from monitoring everything to really monitoring the things that require action from the operators.
And so if and any one of you can answer this, but if for the grid operators who are in the control center, doing the work on a daily basis, how is their life gonna be different? How is their job gonna be different? Is it gonna be fundamentally different, or they just have more tools at their disposal?
Yeah, it's funny that we mentioned more tools, right? Because we're talking about more tools, but we're also trying to change that paradigm of monitoring less. So our tools need to be sophisticated. We got to have centralized type of information. So the situational awareness, we're not bouncing from one application to another. So that's our challenge and with the project is to have centralized information that's actionable, streamline those processes for the operators. And I think that the gauge of that success is really how that we're managing the grid. We like to use the term operational excellence, but also, we're doing a good job. But in addition to that the operators feel they're happy with the way they're performing and they don't feel overwhelmed with data and tasks. So we should be able to really centralize a lot of that through this project.
And to build on what Brian is saying, so as an example, we've actually done some site visits and some benchmarking with some other entities to see, how they've been able to evolve, their situational awareness and visualization in their control center tools. And so today where, we have a heads up display for an operator, which has all the data, all the information, and no prioritization around those urgent things that Brian mentioned that need the operator attention. What a lot of these entities have done is they've found a way to take the planned work and maybe mute it. So the information is still there and available, but it's not necessarily, calling out to the operator as an urgent thing that needs their attention, where something that's more urgent, maybe it has an audible alarm, it's bright red, it's flashing, it draws their attention and says, hey, this needs some action, or certainly needs you to look into it to, see what happened.
So I know obviously being a grid operator can be a stressful position, and but it sounds like this will take some stress off the operators, these upgrades, and which is important.
It definitely, yeah, that's definitely one of the goals, Gary, is to present information that gives them a good awareness and then back that up with the processes and training to know how to address these situations as they occur. So they're prepared and have the tools at their disposal to manage the grid as it continues to evolve, because we're really only at the beginning of this evolution. The number of resources we're going to see coming onto the grid and some of the older resources retiring is dramatically increasing. So we're trying to catch up a little bit, but then get ahead of it. So the operators are ready for this and our processes are ready to manage all these new resources. And I'll add in one thing is that many of these new resources coming on are by companies that have never actually been involved in power system operations before, newer technology companies. And so we're actually been having to work with them to train them on what it means to be connected to a power system, how they impact the power system, and how we need them to behave and to respond to our dispatches.
I wonder if there's any one or two things that you've experienced in this project, in this modernization program as it started and as ramped up, that has been something like when you got that in place, you thought, "Wow, that's really going to make a huge difference." I mean, are there one or two things that really stand out for you that are kind of game changers for how the control center and the operators function?
I guess one thing I would say that I think we've been able to implement recently is more upstream from the control room, but it has to do with when we're doing enhancements and or changes to the applications to use a different process and how we look at what's needed by the operators. How do we update the software to meet this need? And it's kind of using what they call the agile process. And it's allowed us to develop enhancements and implement them much quicker than our older process. So that's been, I would say, a win for us as the operations, but the company. But then also, I think some of the big things is we have been able to enhance our alarms and our energy management system, our EMS. We've been able to make some good enhancements to reduce the distracting alarms and give them alarms that are truly actionable. And so that's been, I would say, one of the bigger early wins out of this project. But I know there's been a lot of other ones. I want to let Brian and Tricia also share anything they are.
I think in the control room, specifically going back to the people and process, the communications of plan changes. So when technology has planned patches or software deployments, the communications, the planning that's happening in advance, the awareness of the impact, the anticipated impacts, and the communications that we do both internally at the ISO as well as outreach to our customers, we've seen a real big improvement in that space. And I think a lot of that work up front, that's the planning, the communications, it gives the operators a lot more comfort and understanding what the change is, how that's going to impact their tasks at the time, and those type of things. I think that's been huge. And I think back to John's point about like the agile process, over last summer, we had some challenging conditions, and some of the market information that we had on our dispatchable resources was needed some improvement. We had some information coming out of those UIs that wasn't as clear and concise as it needed to be, and so that agile process really proved to work really well, because that was something that was identified in short order, was immediately went to work with our internal team members, engaged with the vendor, and quickly turned around an improvement, a massive improvement to that display, where we have the situational awareness is much more sufficient for the operational needs. Tricia, you get
and I think kind of building on both what John and Brian have said, I think between that upstream kind of agile process, we've also been able to improve the quality of our testing, right? So we've been able to identify, by prioritizing with the operators, what are the critical functions that must always work, and like whether you think that you're touching that part of the system or not. And that's really improved our regression testing capabilities. So we've caught more issues. It actually has slowed down the rate of change into the control center, which has made it a more stable environment, with less disruptions around, patching and things like that throughout the week. But it's resulted in a better quality product with fewer, issues to go back and fix later on.
Great, thank you. So when we talk about change in the industry and change in the nature of the resources in the grid, one of the big changes, certainly, in California and at the ISO, has been all the batteries we have are available to the grid now. I think 3 years ago we had something like 220 megawatts of batteries. Now we have 7,188, I think, as of the end of last year. How does this influx of batteries and making sure they're set right and state of charge and pricing and dispatch, how has that played into this? And Brian touched on a little bit when we was talking about last summer, but how has this played into the overall modernization and how is that going to help us make sure the batteries are doing what we need them to do?
Yeah, the piece that I touched on earlier with the dispatchable generation, that was really focused around batteries. The dispatchable generation quantities in the market that the operators are looking at on an interval by interval basis, basically, didn't account for the battery's state of charge. So it was looking at where the resource currently was in terms of whether it's discharging or charging, and at what megawatt output, and comparing that with its actual like Pmax or outage limits that it has. Now it's looking at it's integrating that state of charge and being more intelligent with knowing what its true dispatchable capability is. So that was a big win for us in terms of dispatchable capability within the market. But in addition to that, I would say, we've got a lot of talented operators that build some really great displays, and Pi has been a great tool for us for probably a decade or more. Been a long time we've had Pi.
Yeah, and just when we say Pi, it's a graphical display that the operators can use data to train their do graphs, so that gives them a better awareness of this. So Pi, plant information is the application.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, but those displays that the operators have built have been wonderful. They get used at the generation dispatcher level, but they also get used at the ship manager level as well, where they can see the entire fleet of battery resources, see what their state of charge is, and they can visualize that in real time.
And Gary, I want to add on a little bit to that. I mean, maybe taking your question a little bit broader. With the batteries coming on, they are a resource like we've never had to manage before. And I'm going to say nobody really understood, including the manufacturers, the operators of these batteries, how they were going to work, how this is going to, especially within a market optimization program. And California is managing more batteries than anyone else in the world. So we're having to almost learn as we go. But there is some challenges at times, but we quickly, from top to bottom, including our stakeholders, we find an issue, we discuss it internally, take it to the stakeholders, try to figure out what's the best way to manage these resources or this particular issue with the resource, and then reintegrate it into the market and or procedures. So it's still a learning process, and we probably still have more to go, but we've made tremendous strides over the last couple of years in better integrating the storage resources into the market optimization, as well as just the grid management.
Great. So I'll always remember way back when I was in college, I took a tour of the Golden Gate Bridge, and they talked about painting the Golden Gate Bridge, and they said, well, it's such a big project that when you paint it, and then when you get to the end and you're done painting it, you have to turn around and start painting it again because it's taking you so long to get to that point. So is this process that we're talking about ongoing? Is there an end date at which point the modernization is complete? And we start thinking about other things, or how do you know when it's done and what's your measure of success?
Yeah, I think we've realized it's really never done, especially since technology continues to advance faster and faster. I don't see this slowing down, and probably during my career. I do think right now we're trying to really turn this big ship and how we've been managing the grid from the old way to a newer way. We'll probably get onto a course to where it's more of maintenance, but right now it's a big push. So we'll probably in 2 or 3 years get to the place to where we feel it's starting to stabilize and it's been integrated into our processes and procedures to where we can manage this. But I'm expecting that we're going to see new technologies in 2 or 3, 5 years coming onto the grid that we haven't seen before, and will require constant modernization of how we manage the grid and the resources.
Yeah.
I think what it'll really enable us to do when we kind of get through the kind of the significant uplift up front is it'll actually make it easier to manage change in the future. Like we're going to be able to better anticipate how we need to adapt our systems and processes in the future. Right now, a big effort comes up, and then it's like, okay, this is a really big uplift, and you have to go through some big architecture decisions to figure out how to bring that in. And I see this overall, making our whole program, from the change management to the operator tools to the training, just a lot more flexible and able to adapt in the future.
To tag on that, but I think that in 2023, a lot of the focus was baseline, right? And I think that goes to what Tricia was saying there is, we in 2023, we're laying that foundational improvement piece, right? And we've got a baseline and it's scalable. Now we can handle more throughput on some of those changes. And then now we start as we get that baseline solid, now we start focusing on those modernization things that can handle the additional changes that are headed our way.
So I know operators, undergo extensive training, right? And to develop the expertise they need to do this job. So is training, because there's so much new technology and so much change going on within the control center, has training needed to ramp up as well? Are people going through more training or different types of training as a result of this program?
Yeah, so we're having to kind of rapidly adapt our training program as we're going. So like one of the accomplishments that we had last year was actually able to add on to our new hire operator training, to be able to introduce more hands-on understanding. So part of operators have to get like a license to drive, right? They've got to get qualified and certified, to work their position. And what we're able to do now by improving kind of our training environment capabilities and actually even kind of evolving the knowledge within our training and our team that's handling all the change management is if we can arm the operators a little bit better and train them a little bit more off floor when they have time to have discussions and, kind of get better context for what they're doing and why, then it actually helps them when they get on the floor and then they see those things in context of how they're actually needing to perform those tasks in real time. We got really good feedback that like taking that additional time off floor was just a really, really big benefit to helping folks be able to ramp up. So over time, that's exactly that foundational piece that we're trying to work across the entire control room to make sure we're able to do that same thing for every desk. So as people learn new positions and new roles and things, so it isn't just, that improved foundation on that new hire piece, but that's that continual thing throughout your whole career, right? That will be able to continue to help you also build on, your knowledge and foundation.
Yeah, and I mean, actually, a part of the CCFINM program is actually a huge revamping of our training facilities. We're expanding our training rooms and I would say highly upgrading our simulation room. We actually have a simulation room where the operators get to go in, sit down, and have most of the same tools they operate with in the main control room and go through some scenarios that help prepare them for issues we have either experienced and or anticipate we could experience. So the executives of the company has invested heavily into the training of operators, and that's actually ongoing right now. And we expect to have the new rooms available to us in June of 2024.
That's great. Well, you guys have provided a tremendous overview of this important project, and I think we've covered it well. Is there anything else that you wanted to add that our listeners should know about this work?
I would just say that, I mean, this is really a big, important thing for operations, but it's big and important to the company. It's touching every process within the California ISO, and we're looking at everything to evaluate how we need to, evolve the company. But it has a tremendous backing of the board and the executives. They've been fully committed to this with both feet into this game, and they're back there pushing and really cheering us on. So we just want to thank everyone for all their support.
Great. Well, I thank you all for taking time out to talk to us today about this project and continue success with bringing it to fruition. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks. Bye-bye.